this project, Complete Works, has a number of different origins for me. One of them is this interest that I think we've had for a very long time in the way that language makes stories happen. The way that when we hear a story, we mentally unpack it and sort of unfold it into a visual event. And then the second thing that I think we thought about a lot is this process of taking these very big, full, epic kind of stories, which a lot of the plays are, and shrinking them down to the kind of scale where you can make them happen on the tabletop.
It starts with a watchman standing, lonely and cold, on the battlements of a castle in Denmark. And he's joined by a second watchman who wants to know if he's seen anything that night. And they're both surprised when, out of the shadows, a third character arrives. And it's Horatio, a scholar and a nobleman, and he wants to know why he's been brought out of his bed in the middle of the night.
We became very interested in this idea that you could use objects to represent the characters of a play, and in so doing you could tell the whole story of the play. And there's something sort of, I suppose, particularly enjoyable about the idea of taking great works of literature like Shakespeare that have these sort of vast casts and big themes, and the idea of shrinking it all down to the top of a table and trying to tell the story with like a bottle of ketchup and a pepper mill and some sugar cubes. And in a way, when you're doing that, you're in some ways, of course, making the story a little bit stupid, but at the same time, actually, what you're trying to do is make people care about these objects like they're the characters. And I think it's, that's the sort of interesting quality that it has.
And a lot of the process on this one has been for each individual at home reading and reading again and making notes and sort of getting on top of the material. And it's great when we do come into the room, because suddenly you get to hear the story of a Shakespeare that you had forgotten or didn't even know ever.
Years ago, I made a video actually of my brother, and he was telling the story of King Lear, but he'd only read the play one time. And he came to my house, he'd come on the train up to Sheffield, and on the way he'd read the play. I'd asked him to, and we had dinner and some drinks, and then after all of that, Hugo and I asked him if he would read, if he would tell the story of the play. And what was great about it, and I think this was a clue for Complete Works, was that you got this sort of condensation of the narrative, this summary of the narrative, sometimes, in Mark's case, with little bits out of place or relationships slightly wonky, but told with this sort of awareness of this very vivid sense of the arc of the story. And that's something that I think, we really wanted to go to in this project.
And the two princes are asleep, lying in each other's arms in the tower. And the two murderers creep in. And they look down at the sleeping princes, and one of them takes a step back, and he says that he can't do it.
So I think we first played around with it a couple of years ago, and I remember telling the story of Richard II with a whole load of coins, which, thinking about it now, must have been very confusing because the coins probably all looked very similar. But we knew there was something in this telling of the plot and telling of the story that we were really kind of infatuated with. Something about the stage and the table and the characters being these really often quite ugly objects that you're asked to feel for.
There's a big job really in this project, one very sort of central task, and that's breathing life in a funny sort of way into these objects, into the stories, and trying to make them happen by using the objects as stand-ins for the characters.
And Pericles turns to Marina and he says to the assembled crowd that he's certain he's found his long-lost daughter.
Most of the pieces that we've made that operate over duration really work with a continuous time frame, so 6 hours from, say, 6 o'clock until midnight, with an audience free to come in and out. And this, I suppose, has a relationship to that idea of duration, in the sense that it's presenting such a large body of material, but what it's doing is doing that over 9 days. So it's doing it over the 9 days of Foreign Affairs Festival in Berlin, and so every evening there's 4 plays.
In almost every case, you sort of feel something start to happen as we're rehearsing. You feel the drama in the story, you feel the sort of connections between characters, even though you're using these sort of rather absurd materials. It's, what we're doing, it's very, very simple, but at the same time there's this kind of very elemental magic in it. There's this extraordinary thing that something unexpected begins to happen, and you feel like performance is possible, theatre is possible on this incredibly sort of limited stage.
I hope that Complete Works is going to be a really exciting and accessible piece, and that the rules of it, the game of it, is really easy to understand. And I think when I'm watching other people do it, that the engagement is really strong, that you're watching people who have really thought about how to tell a good story, and they're taking these unlikely objects and they're really bringing them to life.